Today I'm judging the comic. Welcome to Wolfsgate. Hey, Walter here, doing what I can to make comics easier because it shouldn't be overwhelming or daunting to tell your story. I make videos about making comics, so if that's something you're into, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And today we're going to be continuing the comic critique series, and we're going to look at the comic Welcome to Wolfsgate by Puppy. Now here's my disclaimer for these videos. Critiques are inherently biased and they're based on our aesthetic preferences, and while I try to keep these critiques as unopinionated as possible, it is going to happen, but there are no rules. This is art, so you can do whatever you want, but these are my thoughts. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the comic. All right, let's start with talking about the story, and let's look at the summary for Welcome to Wolfsgate. Honora, Augustus, and Lyle wake up in a strange new world, unsure of how or where they arrived. Here they meet other survivors, encounter deadly creatures, and try to piece together the mystery of their predicament. Readers can participate in group polls to decide what lands to explore, which characters to develop as we explore the unknown. There are many mysteries to solve, important choices to be made, and characters to learn from them. Either way, welcome to Wolfsgate. So besides me flubbing some of that, I think this summary is pretty good, though it is nagging on me a little bit that more attention is paid to the reader interaction voting than the actual story. The interaction aspect is also minimal in the actual story from what I read, but in the summary it makes it seem like it is a very integral part of enjoying the story. Yet it doesn't come into play until chapter 46. So I was expecting it much sooner from the description I read. Now it's possible that the voting is going to become more important in the episodes that are going to be coming out in the future, so that is a possibility. I think possibly giving a hint of the genre would be nice. Is it a serious story? Is it dark? Is it comedic? The name and the thumbnail do give hints for that it's going to be potentially more playful, but the description doesn't provide much insight into the overall vibe. So before we continue, here's my question to you. Have you ever read one of these comic summaries and been like, no, and just completely walked away from the comic without looking at the first episode? Let us know in the comments, because I'm curious to see how many people actually look at these summaries. Okay, let's talk about the setup for this story. With a story like this that takes place in a fantastical world, I think it's really important to show us that is actually a fantastical world, which I think you did quite well with the character designs and these kind of weird pumpkin birds and these magic floaty spell things. The characters have these really strong archetypes that come across pretty well. Honora's the brave, protective sister. Dante's the aloof, suave dandy. Some may say that's cliche, but I think these are really useful to ground your reader quickly to your characters, and then you can start fleshing out those generic molds as the story progresses forward. So this is really smart. And it's pretty clear that our heroes are in this strange new world and they need to escape or survive or flourish, whatever it's going to be. So I think the setup is clear with what you have here. Okay, so pacing. Now the pacing gets a little wobbly for me. The first scene took 5 episodes to get through, and this is because you do have shorter chapters with an irregular posting schedule. Absolutely nothing wrong with this at all. But I think because of this, you have to be really smart of where you're spending your time in each episode. Honestly, I have this exact same problem. I love drawing action scenes, so I'll spend a whole bunch of time with all of these panels, and when I draw 20 panels when I could have just drawn 2 panels, but it's something that I've been trying to work on, and it's stuff I've been noticing in other comics as well. For example, the first scene isn't really all that bloated, but I think it could still be tightened up. We spend a lot of time with Lyle running away with Augustus so that we could see that Honora stays behind because she's trying to protect her brother, and she cares more about that than her own safety, and also that she isn't scared. This shows that she's brave, which is great, but I think you could get the same message across with less panels. For example, you could have the bird chase and corner Lyle and Augustus. Lyle is petrified, unable to act, and out of nowhere, Honora leaps onto the bird, saving both of them. This has also the added effect of keeping the energy and the pacing of the scene increasing the entire time and not slowing down for Lyle and Augustus to get away from the scene and then walk back to the scene. So this could get us to the same place in the story in maybe 3 episodes instead of the 5 episodes that it took. And like I said, with the characters have really good, strong personalities, makes them very likable, so I think that part is doing really well. All right, now the dialogue. The dialogue's pretty good. There are a few spots where the dialogue does get a little clunky, a little bit too on the nose. I also think there's a tendency to want to try to hold a reader's hand through the story with a bit of dialogue that explains the situation all the time. Like, I can't let those things get too close to us. I need to keep Augustus safe. I think most readers are going to have already inferred this from the story that they're reading. When the dialogue becomes to expository, explaining a story versus telling a story, it starts getting clunky. I think this comes into play because there is a tendency to want every single panel to have dialogue in it, and some panels just don't need it. Let the art speak for itself. Another example, I've already used up so much of my power earlier, I'm not sure how long I will be able to hold on. We already know he used his power and we can see he's struggling to produce more of these magic balls. So we could change this line to, "Crap, I'm out of juice. Hope they can stay alive long enough for me to recharge." Or he could yell out to Honora, "Minor technical difficulties, keep them distracted for a few if you'd be so kind." Think of dialogue that can express the character versus explaining the situation. I think for the most part, the story is pretty clear. The thing that I had the most problems with for your story was the engagement. The story moves fairly quickly and it is very digestible, which makes it an easy read, so you want to keep reading more and more. This is great. The episodes always end on a beat that makes you want to keep reading also, you know, the page turner, the cliffhanger, whatever you want to call it. The problem for me was the evolution of the story. While it was easy to get into the story and the characters, I started feeling like the story wasn't moving. Things were happening, but the story never progressed past that first scene. The story starts with 3 kids lost in a strange land, and after 48 episodes, I don't know any more about the story or where it's going. The last episode you have leaves off with the characters deciding what daily errand they should go on. It almost feels like a video game, which plays really well into the reader interactive voting aspect of the comic, but it also makes the actual story element of the errand feel inconsequential to the overall story. It is a really cool element for your story, the interactive voting stuff, but it does require a lot of balancing between storytelling and improvisation. I feel like a lot of that might have sounded harsh. It wasn't meant to be, it was just my initial reactions to the story as I binged it. I love stories that just have fun and go on adventures, and if Wolfsgate is that kind of story, that's awesome. Not everything has to be doom and gloom and rushing to save the world from some evil baddie. But if there is some nefarious mystery to the whole thing, I think about showing some of that sooner than later since we're already on episode 48. All right, let's move on to the art and talk about this thumbnail. I love this thumbnail. The character design is so distinct, it really catches the eye. I would try upping the contrast though by either lightening or darkening the background in comparison to the main object, or maybe just completely deleting the background, because at such a small size, backgrounds don't really add anything to the image and really just distract from the main character. So I don't have too much to say about the artwork here, storytelling, panel choices, expressions, poses, backgrounds, compositions. All of that stuff is really stellar. I think you do a great job with it. The only thing that stuck out to me was sometimes being confused by the emotions that the characters were displaying. Either it didn't fit or it felt too over the top for the given situation. It didn't happen too often, and when it did, it was mostly in the earlier episodes. The main one I remember is the first scene where Honora and her friends are running away from these pumpkin bird things, and she stops right here before she jumps over the fence. And I'm not sure why she stopped. Could she not jump over the fence? Did she run out of time? Or maybe she decided at this point that she was no longer going to run because she needed to hold the bird back long enough to give her friends time to escape. I'm not sure. I needed a little bit more information, like maybe she could have just yelled, "Get Augustus out of here, I'll keep it distracted, go." Of course, this goes against what I said earlier about dialogue not needing to be exposition, but here I felt like there might have been too much jumping for emotion or motivation. So I needed a little bit more, I think. Get ready for a mega opinion time. Mega opinion time. All right, so this next technique is gaining a lot of popularity, but I'm not a huge fan of it. It's the sideways panel. And there's two reasons I'm not a huge fan of it. One, I think it feeds into the false assumption that Webtoon isn't good for wide angle shots, and I feel like I disproved this in a previous video. Second, I have to crank my neck to look at it, and even if I'm on a phone and I try to turn my phone, the screen is going to auto rotate. It's not locked. You could probably find a setting to lock rotation, but that's way more work than I want to do for a single panel. In the same video where I talk about wide shots, I also talk about this sideways panel, but I advise using it as a diagonal slant versus a straight vertical panel. I also think there should be a storytelling element to using this particular panel layout. Example, let's say we have a scene in an alley and I draw it sideways. Okay, it's bigger than it would have been horizontally, but I don't know if the effect is important. Why did I do this from a storytelling perspective? Now, what if I had a character running and jumping on the objects in the alley as we scroll down? Now the character leads you through the sideways panel, plus the downward angle also adds to the momentum of the character running, since they are moving in the same direction that we are. One last little thing is that you start every episode with a recap of the last handful of panels from the previous episode. I think this is good because you have these long gaps between your episodes. So this is good for your loyal readers to be reminded of what happened last. But it can also be annoying for someone who is binging your comic, like me. In the first episodes, it was fine. I think you kept it to around 3 panels. But in some of your more recent episodes, it almost felt like the recap was as long as the new episode itself. So I'd watch for that and use as few panels as possible to just spark the memory without completely retelling the last episode. All right, for the lettering, I think you're doing a lot of fun stuff with the lettering. I ain't mad at it. You stay pretty consistent within the rules you've established for your own lettering style. In the earlier episodes, maybe you changed the font size a little too often, maybe getting a little too small at times, but in the most recent chapters, it feels a lot more controlled and polished. At times, you sometimes have a lot of empty space in your balloons, so I'd want to get that a little bit more consistent, have your balloons a little bit tighter around your lettering, but not really horrible. I will say that for your orange balloons here for the main characters, I'd want a little bit more contrast between the balloon color and the text color. It's not exactly hard to read, but I just feel like it could be slightly better if we lighten the value of the balloon color and just increase the saturation to keep that orange color. There is some grammar stuff as well. Don't forget periods at the end of your sentences, and I would suggest using commas. People like to argue about the Oxford comma, but this example right here is why I think it's really important to use a comma when a character is talking to another character and uses their name, or a nickname for that matter. The Oxford comma is highly debated for lists, so I don't want to get into that debate, but I will say that I am in favor of using the Oxford comma in general. And just for personal preference, if you're going to use multiple exclamations, I say use 3 exclamations instead of 2. 2 exclamations could be a mistake, but 3 exclamations is most certainly intentional. Same thing with the ellipses. You use 3 dots, not 2 dots. There was a part that confused me when he called her Linda because her name isn't Linda, it's Nora. And I found out from reading the user comments that this is actually Spanish for pretty, but I wasn't able to figure that out from the story. So that might be something you want to sneak in there where he calls her Linda and then she says, stop calling me pretty, or why do you keep calling me Linda? And he can explain it, just like a quick line to explain what that means if you want people to know what that means. The other thing you need to watch out for is the height hierarchy of your dialogue balloons. There was a few times where the second bit of dialogue was higher than the first bit of dialogue, so I tended to read those out of order, and I had to go back and figure out what order I was supposed to read it in, which kind of took me out of the story. So make sure the first dialogue is higher than the second dialogue, higher than the third dialogue. All right, so that's Welcome to Wolfsgate. Really solid comic. You're doing a really good job, Werepuppy. Love the story, love the characters. You know, like I said, I would just want to see where the story is going, if it is in fact going anywhere, or if it's just a fun story. That's the only big thing that stuck out to me. If you guys are liking this comic critique series, make sure you hit that like button. If you want to have your own comic submitted, I currently have the submissions closed because there's too long of a line. If you want to skip the line, check out my Patreon page. That will get you to the head of the queue. Otherwise, make sure you share this video with all of your friends and family, your cats, your dogs, your goldfish. And if you want to keep making comics easier, be sure to like, link, love, hug, and hit that sub button for more sweet, sweet goodness. Peace.